Okay, so here's the story. I've been compiling information for a while, and I think it's time to start sharing what I found. Nobody else is talking about this, and I need to understand what's happening. Here's what I know. My uncle was in the military, and a few years ago, he was in an accident. And he wound up in a military hospital for a while, sharing a room with this pilot. And the pilot claimed that he'd been part of this secret project where scientists were using weird radiation to, fold time and space. My uncle complained, but they couldn't move him, so he had to keep listening to this guy, this pilot. And they sort of became friends, and after they got out of the hospital, the pilot kept writing to my uncle. My uncle never wrote him back, but he kept all the letters, and then after my uncle died, I found this whole big box full of them. It's all nonsense, but it was this weirdly consistent nonsense. The pilot said he was part of this top secret program where he was put into a craft that was meant to be moved not just through space but through time for just an instance. But something had gone wrong and they'd sent him through to another dimension, like another layer of reality. They called it Project IronSun. And then he describes these things that he saw over and over. Clearly there was something wrong with the guy, but my uncle didn't throw out his letters, so I read them all. And I just couldn't stop thinking about it. I did a bunch of searching online, but I could never find anybody talking about any of it. There was that story, the Philadelphia experiment, but that's not real. This sounded sort of like that, though. The pilot said he was placed in a chamber, and then the chamber was filled with this light and this warm pink fluid. But somehow, even when it was full, he could still breathe. That's a thing they've done with rats. I've read about it, like making it so they can pull oxygen out of the water. That's a real thing. He said they were trying to travel from our perspective of space and time into another, using a substance that would only be referred to as negatively charged exotic matter. They tried going smaller at first, reaching past the microcosm into a lower condition of reality, with simpler rules than our own. This pilot said that they'd used him to pull something out of that second dimension. So it was something with height and width, but no depth. He said it would come out screaming and burst upon impact with our reality. He described it like a thin sheet, a shadow in his hands that suddenly turned into an armload of black and purple guts. He said they sent him to other places, other spaces, but he couldn't tell what was real after a while. They had him on a lot of drugs to deal with the physical and mental stress of moving through dimensions, and he said things got kind of blurry. He said he could remember seeing things. A church made out of a warm glow, with billions of clockwork pieces of light spinning in perfect harmony, infested with these giant wasps that were oozing a gritty oil across everything they touched. The wasps had a hive up in one corner. There was a broken little bundle of excretions where they lay their larvae and raise their brood to know only consumption and hate. Those are the letters he sent my uncle. He said the tests were done in a concealed location he couldn't talk about, a top secret military installation, but the people who work there called it the Ghost House. Then one day I heard this thing on the news about this guy who'd walked into a post office and started waving a gun around, begging for somebody to help him before he shot himself in the head. People claimed he was saying a bunch of weird shit, mumbling all crazy to himself, but there was one witness who said that she clearly heard him say, "Don't send me back to the Ghost House." It was just a random news story, but now it was in my head, and I couldn't let it go. I started doing some real research then. Just searching for terms and phrases online, following paths of information wherever they might go. And that's where I found this one LiveJournal page. This guy with the username Ace of Hades. He describes this nightmare he's had as like being stuck in a ghost house where time and space are subject to the laws of man and not the other way around. So I reach out to the guy and we start emailing, and eventually he admits to me that the nightmare, it's really part of this confusing period of time that he lost to like post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And he says he's been seeing a hypnotherapist and he's on a bunch of drugs and that he's got these 3 years of his life where he's not sure what happened. He says he's not even supposed to talk about it, but he knows he used to be a pilot. Okay? Are you getting that? And he says that he was also selected to be involved in a top secret operation known as Project IronSun, and eventually he did hear people using the term the ghost house. I ask him what they were doing, and he says he doesn't even know anymore. He says things got blurry for a while, and then one day he woke up in a psych ward with an IV in his arm, and his name had been legally changed. He was no longer the man he'd been before, and in order to be released from the psych ward, he had to agree to go along with the new life they had created for him. A new name, a new identity, no family, no pets. He says they still monitor him, so he has to keep up the illusion or they'll put him away again. He says he can only talk about his past, his real past, as bad dreams. Anything else and they'll lock him up again. He thinks we sent people to other layers of reality and interacted with the things that live there. He thinks we made contact with something. Not aliens, but like extra-dimensional beings. He says they sent pilots and astronauts, and they came back infected by whatever was on the other side of that boundary. Not all of them. Some were just in shock, but others carried something of that place out inside themselves. It changed them, he said. These things on the other side, he says they're not what they claim to be. They're finding ways to infiltrate our culture, our society, positions of social and economic power. They can look so much like us that we revere them, worship them, but they're not what they appear to be. He says they're acting like they want to help us, but that's not why they're here. He can't prove it, but he thinks they want to colonize our dimension. They want to get our whole species primed so they can just step in and start steering us towards a global holocaust, a planetary concentration camp. He says they like to lay their eggs inside our brains, children's brains especially. Children can take on other dimensional concepts more easily. Adult brains have a tendency to... He said that it's like a bunch of aneurysms at once. Basically, they burst. So I stopped getting messages from the guy, and I knew what town he lived in, so I started reading the local paper online and quickly found evidence of a guy named Rodney Lamar, who'd recently thrown himself off a local bridge and drowned. The paper said he had a long history of mental issues, including full-on psychotic breaks from reality, and it had most likely been during one of those breaks that he'd chosen to end his own life. And that's what I got so far. I don't know what it means, but that's what I got. I mean, I got a little more, but I'm going to do a part 2 to this, okay? And then you can just judge for yourself what I found.